So we'll just go ahead and great. We'll go ahead and get started and hope that we have a few more people joining us. But my name is Pam Bold, and I am with CCR REN, the Central California Rural REN, and I also am the executive director of the High Sierra Energy Foundation. We're happy to be presenting different courses through our Codes and Standards program. And today, as you know, we're going to be presenting energy codes for accessory dwelling units. If you want to go on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so I wanted to give a little bit of background about the Central California Rural REN. We were approved by the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, in September of 2024 for a business plan that goes through 2027. We are administered by the County of San Luis Obispo as our lead administrator, and is responsible for coordinating and partnering to implement programs and reporting and regulatory requirements. We offer 6 programs primarily designed to serve our hard-to-reach, disadvantaged and underserved communities, or just rural communities who haven't had access to programs that some of our more urban counterparts have. Next slide, please. So we are composed of these 5 organizations: the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, or AMBAG, San Joaquin Valley Clean Energy Organization, or SJVCEO, the High Sierra Energy Foundation, the County of SLO, as I mentioned, as our administrator, and the County of Ventura, who acts as in an advisory role. And so as you see, we have 58 counties in kind of the central region of the state, which represent primarily rural and hard-to-reach communities. Our programs are listed here. Residential, which brings audits and installation of simple measures, that has been kicked off in the San Joaquin Valley area and will be rolling out to other areas in the upcoming years. That is tightly knit with our workforce and education program, where youth workforce, they are trained to do those audits in residential homes, to provide homeowners with more information about how they can save energy. We have a commercial energy improvement program that provides no-cost electrification projects for commercial customers. Our public program is just in the Monterey Bay area, but supports public agencies in the region. Codes and Standards here, which we'll talk a little bit more. It provides training and technical assistance for building professionals in the form of these types of trainings or custom trainings even, and in our Coach service, which you'll learn more about later. And then we have a finance program coming up in 2026. So with that, we will move on, and I am happy to introduce the Inbalance Green Consulting team. Today on our call, we have Jennifer Rennick and Grant Murphy, and I will let you all take it from here.
Thanks, Pam. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It seems like we have a relatively small group today, which can be great. So that means there's an opportunity for some individualized, focused attention on the needs that you have. So if you wouldn't mind, could you put in the chat whether you're an architect or design professional, whether you're one of the jurisdictions in the CCR REN area, or maybe you're an interested homeowner who's just trying to learn more about ADUs and figure out if an ADU is what you want to do, or learn more about the energy code that way. That would be helpful. So I'm with, and Grant is with, Inbalance Green Consulting. We do a variety of building energy analysis and lead consulting, as well as codes and standards. So specifically Title 24, Part 6, the Energy Code. We also provide online training, in-person training, and we have some specialty services that we do work with some of the counties in their over-the-counter accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, for plan review. And we do a lot of outreach, and we're available for support and standards. And one of the ways we do that is through our Energy Code Coach program. And that Code Coach program is available to plans examiners, inspectors, architects, designers, builders, project owners, including homeowners and the general public. It's completely free and it is easy to use. You fill out a form online. I'll have a website link at the end of the presentation. Then we'll respond back to you in 1 to 2 days through the Code Coach service. And we can also do a phone call follow-up when requested. This service is available because a little bit of your ratepayer dollars, when you pay your electric utility bill, it goes into a pool of money that then is distributed back to each of these regional energy network service areas to provide education, outreach, and support on the energy code as California moves towards reducing its energy impact and reducing pollution for the greater good of California and the adjoining states, and a little bit of Mexico and a little bit of Canada as well. Today, we're going to cover the accessory dwelling units, kind of give you an overview. Then I'm going to go into the California Energy Code and specifically some of the kind of a big picture code review. Then we're going to talk about energy code measures that are applicable to new construction and additions, alterations, with a focus on how that might impact your ADU or junior ADU project. And then I'll wrap up with some additional resources. If you're a licensed architect or needing AIA or ICC units, we have the learning objectives here for you. You can use this course in counting towards those units. And slides will be provided to all the attendees after we're done. I think Pam or Jess, you email them out to folks afterwards? Okay, great. Let's see, before we dive into kind of the overview, did anyone put in the chat if they were architects or just interested in ADUs? What did we find out?
Yeah, we have 1 design professional and we have 4 jurisdiction staff.
Okay. And please put your questions in the chat. Because given the small group and given that everybody is kind of in, the construction building industry, we can focus and go down into the code as much as you want me to. And I can keep it more general when it comes to like the ADU part of it that maybe we would do for the general public. So feel free to kind of direct this since we have
put your question in chat and I'll interrupt Jennifer as needed.
Yeah. Okay. So in general, and you all may know this, but this is a lot of times when we're interfacing with the general public, a lot of the reasons they want to build ADUs is because they don't have to purchase new land. They don't have to have new major infrastructure. It increases their property value. A lot of times folks want additional rental income, but we're seeing more and more people just need affordable way to live for their extended family. And sometimes they need a flexible living space because they're aging in place. And as most of you probably know, California adopted legislation to address our housing needs. So California Code, beginning last January 2025, had mandated that all jurisdictions have pre-approved accessory dwelling unit plans available to the public. And SB 9, housing development, it allowed for a second primary dwelling unit and it allowed qualifying properties to be subdivided. So what that really did in the end was for certain properties, you could end up with 4 dwelling units total. So the state is looking for ways to help people build more affordable housing, is what this really comes down to it. So this is an example here from County of Fresno for their pre-approved plan sets. And there's a lot of resources available. What I have found is some cross kind of pollination between jurisdictions, but also for the design professionals. I found that helpful to take a look at what some of the other counties or cities have put together just as resources. So for example, Kern County, they have 8 pages of required code notes that folks should put on ADU plan sets. And so Kern County has made an effort to kind of streamline that process and get these notes kind of up front and out there for the people that are building it, and also for the homeowner and everyone involved to know what's going to be really required for that ADU. And of course, there's a great ADU accessory dwelling handbook. It was updated January 2025, and you can get that on the hcd.ca.gov website. So California Energy Code, to put this in perspective, or rather the California Building Code, we have 20, well, big picture, Code of Regulations, we have 28 titles. Title 24 is the Building Code Standards. The Energy Code is Part 6. It's just one part of it. But when it comes to ADUs and housing, we really, Title 20 plays a part with the efficiency standards for our appliances, and Title 25 can play a part with the housing and community development if folks are buying pre-made factory-built ADUs and having them craned in, for example. And then as far as Title 24 is concerned, we have many parts, and the Part 6 is the California Energy Code. That's the part I'm going to be focusing on most today. And then just to kind of as a heads up, Part 7 will now be the California Wildland Urban Interface Code. So a new book coming out there, a new code section. California has been making a steady progress towards carbon-free electric generation. So these energy codes started out in 1978, and then we had energy efficiency strategic planning in the 2000s. And then every 3 years, California updates the energy code, and we're now in the 2022 energy code. And starting in January, we will be on the 2025 energy and building codes. In terms of talking about the energy code, there's 3 terms that's useful to just put out there right now. And some of the things we're going to talk about are mandatory requirements, meaning this is what you have to do for energy efficiency measures that are applicable to all project types. And then we have what's known as prescriptive requirements. Those mandatory requirements I mentioned above are applicable, but these prescriptive approach is that you can take your building and basically follow a checklist. And if you do everything on the checklist, you would comply prescriptively. But if you want to have trade-offs or do something different than that sort of checklist or recipe card approach, you can do the performance method, which involves energy computer modeling. And some of the things that can be traded off would be, for example, using a different kind of wall assembly or a different type of glass than the recipe approach, and you can trade it off and maybe put in a more energy efficient water heater, for example. When it comes to the ADUs, if it's a pre-approved plan set. All this has been figured out. And what we're seeing is some homeowners wanting to change things and then being surprised that they're being asked to find a Title 24 energy consultant to update or create an new Title 24 Part 6 plan set for them. In the rural REN, CCR, Central Coast Rural REN regions, we have multiple climate zones. And a lot of times folks will look at pre-approved plans and they might notice that depending on where that plan set comes from, they're supposed to use the one that's in their jurisdiction, but maybe they're getting ideas from other plan sets. We've seen this in some of the other RENs, that they're surprised to see those requirements. And a lot of times it's because it's climate specific, and the energy code itself is climate specific. And in California, we have 16 climate zones. In our rural REN, we've got climate zone 3, 4, 5 down the San Luis Obispo area, 12, 13, 14, and 16. So many different climate zones. So we're going to have a variety of solutions across each of those counties and cities within this region. And if you're not sure what climate zone a project is in, there's a great California zone tool you can go to and type in the address, and it will tell you exactly what California climate zone you're in. So for ADUs and junior ADU designation types, that does make a difference in terms of how the energy code applies. So by definition, an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, is the complete independent living facility. So it does have the permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, sanitation, i.e. bathroom. And the ADU has to have a separate bathroom facility, separate kitchen, and it can be an efficiency kitchen or a full-size kitchen. It has to have its separate heating, cooling, and ventilation system. An ADU may have shared hot water with the main residence or have its own hot water source. A junior ADU, on the other hand, is a living and sleeping space that's no more than 500 square feet, but it's contained within the existing or within a new proposed single family residence. It has to have its own kitchen. It could be full-sized or an efficiency kitchen. It has to have its own exterior entrance door, but big difference here is that junior ADU can share bathroom facility with the main house. If that's true, it needs an interior access door, and it can share the heating and cooling systems and share the hot water systems. Just as a reminder, the efficiency kitchens do need to include plug-in cooking appliances, a space for refrigerated food storage, so i.e. a refrigerator, and adequate space to actually do the food preparation. Now, in the language of the planning department's policy, kind of housing regulations, ADUs and JADUs have some common configurations that are talked about. So a lot of the cities and counties have adopted these diagrams that were put together for many of the jurisdictions. And we have a detached ADU, new construction. Okay, great. You could also have an internal JADU that's a converted attic, or it could be a detached ADU that's a garage or shop conversion. You could also just do a straight up addition to a house, or you could do what sometimes is called attached, and not the internal, but the attached. It's also internal. It could be a basement or an attic remodel. So that's how those words are used for planning departments, but in the language of the energy code, a detached ADU that you're building from scratch, that's new construction, just straight up new construction. And so all the things for new construction applies, including PV solar requirements. The other ways of looking at the building for ADUs, all of those other types, whether conversions or additions or remodels or retrofits, however, whatever the word you want to put to it, all those types are going to fall under the additions and alterations part of the code. And the requirements are different for each of those. So for new construction ADU, there are going to be wall, roof, floor, and window requirements that are slightly different than the additions, alterations. They're going to have an indoor air quality or outside air ventilation system, mechanical heating and cooling. They have to comply with the electric ready and battery infrastructure storage ready requirements, and PV panels could be required depending on the size of the ADU. So we'll review some of those key things that impact ADU for new construction. And then for the additions, again, it could be, even if it's new to the homeowner, if it's an existing structure on the property, like a detached shop or detached garage, and it's converted to an ADU, even though it's not touching the main house, that's still considered an addition under the energy code. And of course, you could just do a straight up addition onto the house, or you could convert a connected garage, and those are still considered additions. So they have slightly different wall and roof requirements. The ventilation requirement for outside air depends on the size of the addition or the ADU. And you can include a second water heater with that if you want to have the new ADU have its own water heater source.
Jennifer, one quick question I see in the chat from Tyson. Do junior ADUs require built-in cooking appliances?
Plug-in type appliances is how the code reads. But it needs to be appropriate for cooking. And it has to be permanent. So the facility is supposed to be permanent. Does that answer the question? You can use plug-in type. So I've seen now for the ADU and junior ADU market, I've seen 2-burner induction cooktops, both a plug-in type, but also a built-in the counter. So it's very narrow and only has the 2 burners. That seems like a really good solution for that. That's readily available at like Ferguson's supply houses. And then refrigerators are getting more compact, so it doesn't have to be a teeny tiny under the counter refrigerator where you can hardly store any food, but they do make them like 3/4 size now, also readily available with inverter motors and sleek design. So there's some options. The main thing with the designation though of a junior ADU and why this kind of falls under the alteration part of the energy code is that we're not adding any additional floor space or volume to the building. So for example, you may have an existing house with an extra bonus room or a bathroom, bedroom suite, and you could convert that to the junior ADU as long as it's under the 500 square feet. So you could create a door to the outdoors, so the person who would be there could easily get to the JADU, and you could add an efficiency kitchen. But when we do that now, the energy code is only looking at complying with alterations to those walls, ceilings, windows, and domestic hot water, et cetera. If you wanted to, you could do a water heater replacement for the whole house that includes the junior ADU and help offset some of those other features that you might come up in an alteration under the performance method. So there's a variety of ways to do that as an alteration. For new construction, so when we have the standalone detached project, new construction, that ADU does have to comply with electric ready infrastructure. And this only kicks in if the homeowner is wanting to install propane or gas appliances or water heater or furnace. If they choose to do so and they're complying with the rest of the energy code, then the energy code says you have to provide space in your electric panel, or at least designate that, and you have to supply the electrical infrastructure in order to be able to convert that water heater space to a heat pump water heater, the furnace to a future heat pump installation, your cooktop to a future induction or electric, and dryer to a future electric dryer, of which there are several types: induction, ventless, and your standard vented electric dryer are all possible. Now, along with new construction, you don't have to install a battery, but the infrastructure for future battery energy storage is required. And we get this question that comes up a lot, and so I probably can't say it enough, is it doesn't apply to the additions and it doesn't apply to the alterations. So this is why also how the energy code looks at your ADU project is important, because of these different regulations. If you do choose to install a battery, however, you can forego the required infrastructure requirements. If you don't install the battery, then the required infrastructure is something that's going to show up on that plan set. And I put the, kind of a highlights of these code requirements here for you. You'll get a copy of the slides just to make it handy so you can refer back to it. But probably one of the main things that comes out of this that we hear from people is that they are wondering now if they have to have a panel, a new electric panel on their ADU that's 225 amps, even though they don't think their ADU is going to ever need a panel that's 225 amps. And so have a slide coming up, and there is an answer to that question. The California Energy Commission clarified where you could actually put the new panel requirement on the main house and put a smaller panel on your ADU if you want to. But in the meantime, to meet the requirements for the infrastructure for battery ready, you need to have a main electric panel that is 225 amp somewhere, and then you would need sub panel for branch circuits with dedicated raceways that would allow a minimum of 4 branch circuits to be able to power on or keep your refrigerator running, at least one light preferably near the primary egress, and at least a sleeping room receptacle outlet, and then something else of your choice. Oh, I think the other big thing that comes up is trying to better understand what do they mean by sufficient space for the future transfer switch. I'm going to go back a slide, and that's because even though, like in this photo here, you see a number of in-phase batteries, the battery system itself has a transfer switch, has the controllers. Those are the smaller units to the left of the 4 batteries, and that takes up it takes up space. So the architects, they typically need to look and design for that and give themselves several feet wide and at least 30 inches tall for that future transfer switch. The PVs are required. There's a formula that you can use to get your prescriptive sizing requirement. And even if your house does the performance method, you're going to be compared to a house that has this prescriptive requirement. So we often suggest to the architects and the homeowners that if they can't do the math themselves, to get some help with the math and help them figure out how much space they're going to need for their solar panels. But for example, if you have a 750 square foot ADU in climate zone 13, so like Bakersfield area, you're going to need a 2.18 kilowatt system. Let's say your panels 380 watts, that's 5.7 panels. You're going to round up to 6, so you need 6 panels, and then you can have an approximate panel size and start to lay it out. If it turns out that your ADU has a requirement of less than 1.8 kilowatts, you don't have to install the PVs, or if you can show that you don't have an adequate solar access area, also known as SARA. And if that is less than 80 square feet, you don't have to do a PV. And if you install a battery of 7.5 kilowatt hours or larger, you can reduce that PV size by 25%. So the 2025 code update, though, does include that equation, and you can also take what that solar access roof area is. You could get help figuring out how to determine what that is, and then multiplying that by a set wattage and choose the lower of the two PV sizes. So far we haven't had anyone inquire about that. I think it might come up, but ADUs typically are small enough that folks are really just wondering how big their ADU needs to be to not need the PV requirement. So it depends on the climate zone, and it depends on the size of the ADU, whether that's going to kick in. For just to give you an idea of maybe what that might look like, let's say you've got a new house, 1,200 square feet, Fresno, Bakersfield area. So if you had 320 watt panels, you might need approximately 8 of them for that requirement in that area. And if you are trying to get a handle on what that covers for the house's needs, typically it's about 40 to 60% of what the home would typically use. So if you're trying to go for zero net energy, you would add more panels. If they are going to have an electric vehicle and to plug it in, and you wanted the project to be really independent of the grid, you'd need to add another grouping of panels. Or if you took that battery credit, installed the battery ahead of time, you could reduce your PV load by 25%. So then you would need only 6 panels and 1 battery potentially to meet the code. And then in 2025, they've kind of updated their what's called self-utilization credit, meaning how we calculate and how we define that battery being used specifically for that house. And there's additional credit coming up in the new code.
A note
yeah.
on the exemption for under
Yes.
1.8. We're
Yes.
seeing, so in the modeling software, it's really easy to select that, and it doesn't really notify or have many double checks against it. So we're seeing a lot of jurisdictions requesting to see the calc or some kind of evidence that the project actually is eligible for that exception, because it's really simple just to select the button and say that you're exempt. Unfortunately, that puts the onus on the plans examiners. So different jurisdictions are
point.
handling it differently. But it is something that continues to come up that we've seen across the state.
Good point. So yes, that is a really good point. And so that formula can give you an idea of what that prescriptive requirement would have been. And sometimes in the performance method, you'll get a slightly different size. You can also ask you can ask the consultant to not click that button and see what size shows up and have two reports, but it's probably easier to use the formula.
Yeah, our recommendation is either to ask to see it when you see the note on the report saying that it is exempt, or some jurisdictions are just doing it themselves and it's a double check internally. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. The blueprint. This is a great resource if you're trying to keep up on some of the nuance of the energy code, because the code isn't always written so clearly, and it's really hard to future proof something in the code. And we find out afterwards, people come up with great questions or scenarios that what isn't really spelled out in the energy code. So the California Energy Commission will address a lot of those questions, the kind of clarifications in their blueprint. And you can access it online at energy.ca.gov and go to the newsroom blueprint newsletter. And I just excerpt a few questions specific to ADUs, including like, does an ADU need to have its own 225 amp panel if the ADU is built with a sub panel connected to the existing main residence? And they came back and said, no. So as long as that ADU main panel has the 225 amp bus bar rating. So like I said before, what we've seen folks do is go ahead and install a new panel for the main residence and do upgrades on the main residence, and then have the sub panel go to the ADU. And that also works. And then sometimes you'll see a situation where the panel is nominally called a 200 amp panel, but the markings, the actual, ability of that panel could and technically be able to accommodate 225 amp panel. So that's acceptable as long as it's clearly marked. And so again, you can see that on the job site and see it on the equipment. But otherwise, basically 225 amp panel is where you go with new construction. Now that kind of takes care of like the infrastructure, PV, battery side of it, all new construction. Now we're going to touch in on some of the envelope features, just to give you kind of a rundown of what is required for the ADUs and give you a little bit of heads up on what's coming up in 2025. For the most part, the only thing that changed a little bit is some requirements for walls and windows. But for the most part, your attics, your roofs, the code, that part of the code is going to stay the same, other than certain climate zones got a little bit of an upgrade. And those 8, 9, and 10 are not in our rural region, but it's there just kind of as a heads up. So no big change for our area. And then all the climate zones now are getting a prescriptive option to do an R38 cavity or equivalent roof. So that could be a bit of a benefit if just that cathedral roof was what was stopping you from using a really straightforward prescriptive method. For the walls, how us as energy consultants deal with this on the prescriptive, we take a look at a table that looks like this, and we enter this table and we say, okay, we're going to look at walls above grade that are framed. Then we take a look at our climate zone. And in this case, we're looking at 3, 4, and 5, 12, 13, 14, and 16. And we see that a U factor for that is required. Okay, a U factor, that doesn't really translate into an actual acceptable wall assembly, but there's another place in the code we can go to called the reference appendices, and we can, and also there's a manual, a handbook that goes along with all these code requirements. And we can look up a table of typical wall assemblies and what their U factors are. So it starts out with what is your stud size, and assume 16 inches spacing here, what the cavity insulation R value is, the type of insulation it is, and whether you need exterior wall insulation. Well, it turns out in order to meet the 0.48 U factor in the previous table or less, turns out U factors, the smaller the better. There's from this chart, there's 3 types of wall assemblies that make it, and they're all 2x6 framing. They all have at least an R19 cavity fill, and they vary, you know, between R5, R6, exterior continuous insulation. And what we're seeing is that a lot of jurisdictions are getting plan sets where they the builders are trying to avoid the exterior insulation. And so if they do that, they automatically are going to have to use the computer performance method. But if they want to continue with prescriptive, they could follow these kind of guidelines, make sure they hit a U factor 0.048 or less. And there's a lot of resources now available for how to detail your project with the exterior insulation. So rock wool is a common exterior insulation material, and their website, they also are showing details. And same with 475.com, which sells a lot of the products that are available to make it easier to build to the new standards, also including passive house standards. For the doors and windows, same idea. We're going to look at a similar chart. We enter it through fenestration. We're going to look at the maximum U factor and also something called a SHGC, solar heat gain coefficient, gives us an indication of how much sunlight heat can come through the glass. We look at the climate zones we're interested in, and we see for these climate zones, we have a 0.30 U factor requirement, and in some cases we have a 0.23 solar heat gain coefficient, but some climate zones like 3 and 5, which are close to the coast, close to the ocean, no requirement. The rest of our climate zones in the rural REN region has a 0.23. For 2025, those window requirements are getting updated. So most of the regions we're working with, our solar heat gain coefficient won't change, but the new U factor got smaller, so 0.27. So now the windows need to be more energy efficient. The other thing I want to point out, and this comes up especially with the ADUs and small houses, is that prescriptively, you're only allowed to have a total amount of the conditioned floor area, a percentage of that be allowable to be window area. And for some of our climate zones, like 4, 12, 13, 14, only 5% of that conditioned floor area is allowable to be west-facing window. I bring it up because we have projects now where folks really want to just meet their ADU prescriptively, it's easy, straightforward. You don't need specialized performance calculations, but for a small conditioned floor area, they also aren't getting as big a windows as they thought they would like, which then kicks them into that performance method category. Just kind of heads up for everyone, under 2025, the window requirements, they are changing. There also is a new update, and there's an exception to what the mandatory minimum U factor could be, or rather what the mandatory maximum U factor could be. It was 0.45 max, which is much more than those prescriptive requirements. So you would have to use performance method if you're trying to just meet that mandatory maximum. That has dropped down, but there is an exception, and that is for projects that are located in high fire hazard severity zone or the WUI fire areas. And this is kind of key because now the windows may not perform as well as expected in the energy code, but there's an exception because most of the 20-minute fire rated windows, they are having U factors around a 0.42. And so that means even some of these aren't going to meet this new mandatory minimum. So you have to not only look for a really good fire rated window, you're going to also have to do the performance method. So that could change some of those plan sets that are already pre-approved when the 2025 code comes out. So give you an example, just to kind of put the numbers to what the code means. Let's say you have a really small ADU. It's only 330 square feet, but it's a new construction. We've got our 20% window to floor ratio, means only 66 square feet is allowable for the window. And let's say this is in a climate zone 12. So we can only have 5% of it west facing glass. So in this little example, let's say we've got, 3 windows that are 3.5 by 5, and then we've got a 3 by 3 window above a little kitchen sink and a 3 foot by 1 foot window on the west side for their little bathroom, and then we can add a little 1 by 1 window for fun. And these windows, I took from one of the plan set ADUs from one of the jurisdictions, just to use as example. And we've got a total square feet of 65.5, so it just meets our 66 square foot allowable. And then the west window's only 3 square feet, which is less than 16.5 square feet. So we're good. And if you want to have bigger windows, then your project automatically has to go to the performance method. Now with the, so that's kind of fits that new construction. Additions are similar for the windows, but when it comes to the walls, on the additions, there are some wall exceptions, and there's something called a wall extension. And so when this new wall is directly in line with the existing residence, you can avoid the continuous insulation, and you can just fill that cavity with an R15 if it's a 2x4, or an R21 if it's a 2x6. The new walls, however, are going to be compared to a wall with continuous exterior insulation. So this is again where a lot of folks don't want to have walls of different dimensions, and they're hoping to keep the walls the same as what's existing. So they would engage in the performance method for that. An example of this also, this was an image that the CEC blueprint had created just to really explicitly show what they were talking about, what this code requirement is. And they show, you know, a new wall that's not an extension and a new wall that is an extension. And just to clarify when that continuous exterior insulation would be required. Excuse me here. While I take a sip of coffee here, do we have any questions or anything about the walls or wall extensions, or even any comments on what you guys are seeing in your jurisdictions? Would be super interesting to us.
Yeah, we're always looking for topics and pain points so we can find the content or resources that people need more of.
Yeah, it's true. You know, so the alterations kind of world of it, the existing walls, you just when you alter those walls, let's say you're gonna replace some of the windows, or you just want to upgrade the windows as part of that alteration, and perhaps you took a existing space and now you're going to convert it to a junior ADU. You just have to fill the framing back with an R13 if it's a 2x4, or an R20 if it's a 2x6 wall. So fairly straightforward there. And then there's requirements on the window replacement if it's less than 75 square feet. And your solar heat gain coefficient is based on climate zone, and the U factors are also based on climate zone. Now, the window replacement under 75 square feet, those U factors are more generous, and the solar heat gain coefficients are more generous when you're only replacing a small amount of square feet or skylight. But if you're replacing more than 75 square feet or adding new fenestration, then you're required to meet those previous code requirements that we showed prescriptively. And that's true for the 2025 update. You would do that prescriptively. So kind of put it another way, I broke it out for the two requirements based on your climate zone. And this is, we included this just as something to have handy in case any of you are working on plans examination or need this as a resource. And these numbers, of course, would be updated to meet the new 2025 code in January. So this U factor for the window replacements more than 75 is going to drop to a 0.27 in most of your climate zones. Well, in all the climate zones in the rural REN, actually.
Jennifer,
Okay.
we had a quick
Yeah.
question about insulation.
Uh-huh.
Raphael said roof decking insulation requires a 1-inch gap between the deck and insulation. And then his question was if that's not true on a cathedral ceiling.
On the cathedral ceiling, that 1-inch gap has everything to do with the air permeability of the insulation. And so it actually gets into a different part of the code, the residential code 2.5, part 2.5. But if you do like a spray of foam up on the roof deck, closed cell spray foam, couple inches, and then you fill the rest of the cavity, then you can eliminate needing that attic or that roof ventilation. And the code, the energy part of the code doesn't explicitly lay out which detail. It just nominally says that whole assembly, if you want to do a cathedral ceiling, you just have to make sure it all adds up to an R30.
And that's a really common question we get. That's the reason why Jennifer had that ready right away. And it seems to be pushing towards using spray foam as the solution for that requirement. Do you have insight on if someone didn't want to use spray foam?
Yeah, there's different ways to detail it. And let's say you want to use blown in cellulose product. I mean, a great way to do it. And we have, I think we can include some of those details in upcoming course, or you can definitely contact us in the code coach and we can help you with some of the stuff, because it pulls in both the residential code and the energy code, and it's all about air permeability. So you can do like all blown in cellulose, and you can put a vapor open membrane over the top of the roof rafters, then put a furring strip, then put your decking. And if you want rigid, you can, but you can then allow a space for any moist air to escape out of it. It just gets a little tricky when you also might have a project that is in a WUI or the really high fire hazard zone area, where then you don't want to vent that space. So sometimes we're looking at helping folks just do ventless attics and accommodate the unvented semi-conditioned attic with vapor ports in a way. You know, it gets rid of the cathedral ceiling, but then it's helping to address the fire hazard. And not using foam in the house, or not as much foam, because even your penetrations through the building and all that, you will end up with some fire rated foam in your project. Okay, that's kind of it's nuanced. It's nuanced.
And it's a proven assembly that we've seen a number of times, but it's not commonly known in the actual with the builders themselves. So the way the code is written, it ends up majority of the time we're seeing spray foam, the way that code requirement sits.
Yeah. But we appreciate that not everyone wants to do it. They don't always, they're trying to minimize their use of foam.
Yeah.
And trying to look at using more products that maybe don't burn as readily or are non-combustible, like rock wool. But rock wool's vapor open, so you have to make adjustments. Okay. I'm going to move on to the outside air and kitchen exhaust requirements. So kind of unique to ADUs is that they have a small footprint. And you'll see on the next slide that the required kitchen exhaust ventilation goes up with the smaller footprint. And that usually consternates a lot of homeowners and the builders when it comes time to finding their kitchen hood exhaust for a small efficiency kitchen. This is a picture from an ADU that we worked on, and it just shows this is what they ended up doing for the vent hood, and they just made it look sleek by hiding it behind the cabinet, but sometimes in a small space that's feels like wasted space to the person who's the homeowner. So the reason for this higher ventilation rate for smaller footprints is because of all the research that ASHRAE's done, but the EPA had done on indoor air quality. And it turns out with the smaller space, the pollution from the cooking appliance and from the burning of either fossil fuels or just food items, the indoor air quality goes down precipitously with smaller spaces. And that's because there's just not enough other fresh air in the space to dilute the pollutants. So they become concentrated and people have adverse health effects. So what the energy code has in California has decided to do is to create a chart that says, hey, based on your dwelling unit floor area, and this is the conditioned floor area, and then based on whether you're cooking over an electric range or natural gas range, that is going to determine the airflow, CFM, requirement on your kitchen hood or you can use a capture efficiency rating. And not all hood products have their capture efficiency rating yet, but it's written that you can comply with one or the other. And so for this example, for an ADU less than 750 square feet, you would need a 65% capture efficiency or at least 160 CFM minimum airflow to comply for your electric range. And what we're finding is that this can be tricky for a lot of folks, especially when they're trying to save space and they want to combine their vent hood with a microwave oven. It's very difficult to find a small one that will meet that 160 CFM requirement. So it's kind of a heads up. You might just kind of warn folks ahead of time that maybe they just need to get the hood and put the microwave someplace else. But we're actively going through this with the project, and that this is a pain point. And then also to have it be quiet enough, because the code requires that that they meet their CFM at 100 CFM at 3 zones. So it might be a multi-speed fan, but a lot of the research has also found that if the fan is too loud, people won't use it. So it's a combination of both these things. When it comes to the mechanical exhaust, you would have to have it field tested to show that it really is pulling the CFM through that unit, and that CFM is cubic feet per minute, or you can follow a prescriptive design. In other words, you could prove or show that the duct is less than 25 feet linearly, doesn't have more than 3 elbows, and has the proper exterior termination fittings. So kind of the takeaway here is that with the small ADUs, the kitchen hood is becoming a pain point. The rest of the indoor air quality ventilation for just bringing in outside air into the space is based on ASHRAE formula. And I put this formula here because it's a good one for folks, especially the designers, to be able to calculate this and get an estimate of what's ultimately going to be required for fresh air. Technically, you could do a more sophisticated calculation and subtract from this the amount of air leakage through the envelope. But if you're building a tight house in the first place, you're not going to have much air leakage through the envelope. So we recommend just meeting this formula and then you're done. But also with the ADUs, and in the attempt to make them more comfortable, less air leakage, and recommending that they be built tighter, we are recommending balanced ventilation for those spaces. And so the balanced ventilation could be that you have your bathroom exhaust fan is wired to a supply fan. And then you set those two to run at a low CFM continually, of course, with the ability that the homeowner can turn it off if there's really poor air pollution outside. And then this whole thing would have a HERS rater come out and take a look at it. There's also some other really small compact solutions that have heat recovery, and Lunos is one brand. Twin Fresh R is another brand that's becoming available. Those don't have the HVI rating, so you're not going to get extra credit for the heat recovery, but you can use those to just meet your, even though they come with heat recovery, but you can use those to meet your outdoor air requirements. And then Panasonic makes a fairly compact one that would fit up into the recessed ceiling that you create, and has 3-inch ducts coming off of that. And this is what those through the wall or kind of spot IAQ ventilation systems look like, where this canister with the blower, a filter, a heat exchange ceramic, and then your outdoor grill. They work in pairs. This is kind of what it looks like as it's being set up through the wall assembly. And then on the outside of the house, you'd see a small louver, and on the inside of the house, you would see caps and covers. This particular room, just the way everything was set up, the two lunos are close together, but in other situations where you have a little more flexibility than this particular home did, you would separate those two units. But that gives you an idea of what it looks like on the interior. And then for a kind of more robust solution and for the larger ADUs, like your 1,200 square foot ADU, you could use an HVI certified product that has the energy and heat recovery system, but it does require you design a small closet or access to it to get to the filters, to get to the heat exchanger, so you can do maintenance, clean it, diagnostic controls. But if you go this route, you can, under the performance method, you can take extra credit for it, which could help you offset maybe the exterior continuous insulation you don't want to install. That's usually what we're seeing in a lot of the areas, is folks aren't quite sure how to detail the exterior wall insulation, so they're looking for ways to use the performance method to not install it and do other ways to save energy. And the energy code is fine with that, because in the end it saves energy no matter which way you do it. With water heaters, right now for your ADU, you can install a heat pump water heater. You can install a non-electric demand water heater. And these are prescriptive requirements that are allowable. If you don't fit into one of these climate zones, you want to do something different, again, you go to the prescriptive method. But the 2025 code update, it basically is eliminating as a prescriptive pathway your instantaneous water heaters, and you're just going to do heat pumps. You could still install it, but you do the electric ready and you do performance method. And then for really small ADUs or additions that are 500 square feet or less, well, small compared to a new house. I mean, it's still 500 square feet. It's bigger than most people's garages. You can do the instantaneous electric water heater with a point of use distribution, but new to the energy code in 2025, it can actually be a small tank type electric water heater for those small under 500 square foot additions. The point of use requirement, though, is very I mean, when they say point of use, it's point of use. And so in order to comply with this, you would follow a line size versus length for each run to the appliances. So I tried to give you a little diagram of what that would look like. And further, from a plans examiner side of it, your architect, you want to put an actual dimension on this, because on the plans examination, really, you're going to look at this and see that the water lines from your instantaneous water heater, they're usually 3/4 inch thick. You're going to put it immediately into a manifold that makes it smaller, so that you're only sending a 3/8 inch line out to the sink. And then in plan view, that sink can't be further away than 15 feet from your appliance. And the shower isn't to be further than 10 feet. And your washer dryer not further than 10 feet, assuming you're going to use a 1/2 inch diameter piping, typical for a shower and your and your washing machine. For the heat pump water heater ready, Assuming you do want to install a water heater that's propane or natural gas because of the space savings, even though it's an ADU, you don't have a lot of space, you still have to designate for the new construction, you have to designate where a future heat pump water heater could go. So reserve 30 inches by 30 inches by 7 feet tall for that, and make sure that you have, meet all the requirements of the California Electric Code. And again, the blueprint, they did a great issue back in 2020, just to kind of clarify what it means to pre-wire for that future heat pump water heater. So this is a useful diagram. I recommend you take a look at it if they're going the route of gas or propane. And your requirements, though, also for future heat pump water heater, or you're going to install a heat pump water heater, you need to make sure that there is appropriate location for the condensate drain, condensate discharge. So all heat pumps, just like your refrigerator is a heat pump. As your refrigerator works, the condensing coils make water, and a lot of the time that water collects in a little tray, and in the drier climate zones, it just evaporates. You never deal with it. In some of our more humid climate zones, sometimes that little tray has to be done. Same idea here with the heat pump, only these things can make quite a bit of water. So you need to either design a floor drain or make sure the unit is close enough that that condensate drain line can be connected to an appropriate discharge or taken outdoors. There's a few design considerations. I've included this just kind of FYI for folks, because heat pump water heaters are still relatively new. So even if you're not plans examining it or designing for it, someday you may want one. It's good to understand that they do need a certain amount of volume of air around them so they can extract the heat from that air and put it into the tank of water. They do have some noise. Typically, they're around 50 decibels, but they're quieter models out there. That's about as loud as your refrigerator when it kicks on and running. So most folks prefer to have these away from their bedrooms. There are certain clearances to be aware of, and there are ducted kits available for these. So, for example, you could create a closet space that's approximately 36 inches wide, make sure it's 80 inches tall, and you could duct air from the outdoors into the unit and exhaust the cool air outside the building envelope. And so we're seeing what happens with the ADUs is the folks are using the heat pump water heaters to meet all those requirements, and the pre-approved plans include the heat pump water heater, most of them, but then in the field, we're seeing that the installers and the builders are really not having enough space for installing the heat pump water heater properly. So I want to just kind of give you guys a heads up on that, especially if it overlaps with any of your duties coming up for the new 2025 code cycle and your plans get updated. Go ahead, Grant. Do you have a question or comment?
Are you going to hit on the 2025 update for this, the new clarifications? Is that one of the slides we have coming up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'll zip through this.
No, you're good. This is all super useful.
Point of use distribution. Let's say you do the heat pump water heater, you do a duct kit. That's just an example of it. We still recommend that you try and do as compact or point of use distribution as possible. You do get credit for it, but also your heat pump water heater just works better. And then some of the new 2025 code mandatory requirements based on like this field experience. It's like, hey, if you do the ducts, they need to be an R6 insulated. They need to be sealed at the penetrations. And you need to do a calculation. If you're not going to do duct kits, you need to do a calculation that shows that you really do have enough net-free ventilation area around the appliance to function properly. And that requirement is actually based on the compressor size. Not a lot of the manufacturers are readily publishing the compressor size right now. So a 4.2 kilo or kBTU hour compressor capacity is really common. So you could, use that number to get yourself started to calculate the area. And then again, there was a clarifying diagram published by the CEC in the blueprint specifically about how to calculate the net-free area for the ventilation in lieu of a duct kit. So I included that, and I included some math. So you can change the numbers out and just look at that and see, get some help, math help. And also we're code coaches. We can help you with that too. There's a split system heat pump. It's a more expensive solution, but sometimes it's worth it to folks to go to this more expensive split system. So the condenser compressor is outdoors, then the tank is indoors. The other thing is if you have people that are concerned about the refrigerants having an impact on the environment, this particular unit uses CO2 with a global warming potential of only 1 in their unit. So very environmentally friendly and very quiet, as the parts that make noise are on the outside of the building. And you can squeeze these things into very small spaces, which is another benefit, just more expensive. When it comes to space heating and cooling, kind of the biggest thing to know for the ADUs and the JADUs is the ADUs need to have their own heating and cooling system, or rather, their own thermostat, their own heating and cooling system. For the kind of the new requirements, new construction, again, performance pathways, you could install a gas furnace, but that's been updated in 2025 that for all the climate zones, heat pump water heaters required prescriptively. So if you do want to use a gas furnace for all the climate zones now, you will have to do the performance method. The easiest, kind of most straightforward we're finding for a lot of the ADUs and JADUs, if they want a separate heating, cooling, and system, is just to spec out a mini split heat pump that has 1 indoor unit and 1 outdoor unit. This is kind of what they look like when they're installed in a retrofit situation. If you have a raised floor, they can run those refrigerant lines under the house, and they can install a new condenser. The code requires that the ADU not share return air with the primary dwelling through the heating and cooling system. So in that sense, the indoor units need to be separate from each other, and each zone needs its own thermostat. Just practically speaking, though, and living with this sort of system myself, is I would do 2 separate outdoor condensing units and 2 separate indoor condensing units if I had the choice, because sometimes the thermostats, if one space wants to be heated while the other space wants to be cooled, or you end up overloading the system because you're trying to switch from heating mode to cooling mode, vice versa, with the various thermostats, you can trigger some of these units to just turn off. And you have to go through a sequencing to get it restarted. And most people are going to end up calling it professional. So if it were me and I had a renter, I would just keep them separate. That's FYI. The installation is quick. It's very straightforward. And all the installation for the new construction, or even on your addition, when you add the heating system, you will need a HERS rater to come out, but they can get these things up and running in a matter of a couple of hours. It's very straightforward. These types of systems, if you're doing the performance method, you can get a variable heat capacity credit in your Title 24 report. So again, this is another way to kind of offset something else that maybe the project, the ADU, the designer and the homeowner opted for much more glass than that prescriptive method I showed you. So in that case, they would use, they could use something like this and get a performance credit. And ceiling recessed ductless options are available. And I included some of the detailing because it is important that that ductless unit be within the air boundary and within the interior space, so to speak. And that can be done by creating a drywall box that's taped and sealed over those units. And then the refrigerant line runs up to that unit and then out to the outdoor unit. On your Title 24 report, this is an excerpt, kind of a close-up. There is a special features required portion on the report. There is specifically, it'll mention the variable capacity heat pump credit option. Also, it will mention your heat pump water heater is NEA rated, for example. And then there's a HERS summary feature. Again, it's going to spell out what all the requirements are for your heat pumps. And what we recommend is that this information get put on the cover sheet of the plan sets so that it's easier for the HERS rater that's going to be hired to understand what's going on. The plans examiner can see it, that everyone's on board, the builder's on board, and then the homeowner who often doesn't know about these requirements will also hopefully really read it because it's on the front cover. To wrap up, there are a few additional resources I want to point out to folks. Just reminder, California Energy Commission, energy.ca.gov. This is where you can learn more about the upcoming code through the rules and regulations. Part of the tree could go to building energy efficiency, and then you'll get a new landing page. And then on that page, this is where you can learn a lot more about the energy code that's coming up, the Energy Code Support Center, they call it. And this is where also you can click through and navigate to that climate zone finder, fact sheets, and more information. The blueprint, also available, energy.ca.gov, and goes into the newsroom, and then the blueprint newsletter, and you can download past references. They're very useful. And for the homeowners, a reminder that their Title 24 report will have to be uploaded to Cheers. And then that's where the rest of the plans examination and permitting team will have access to their energy documents. And for the architects, you click on that link to get started so that you can go in and navigate through Cheers for your HERS and your Title 24. One kind of question that comes up, last little point, is that the Housing Community Development Title 25 addresses the manufactured homes. So there is a handbook for factory built housing, and that we're seeing these get used for ADUs. And we've had code coach questions where people believe that because they're working through Title 25, that the energy code doesn't apply because it's Title 24 and the appliances are Title 20. They're thinking those things aren't applicable, but there's clarification in the document that explicitly outlines that those factory built homes have to meet the building codes, part 2, 2.5, 3, 4, 6, the energy code, and fire code, mechanical code, and Cal Green, just kind of as a heads up. And then last but not least, codes and standards program, energy code coach. Complete the intake form and we will get back to you. And we have some upcoming courses, 3 more through CCR REN. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Grant and Jess and Pam. See if there's any questions, any comments, and we'll let them close out.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. We will be sending a survey to each of you who have participated, and we hope that you will be able to fill those out for us. As well as please let us know if there are any specific topics that you are interested in learning more about. We can have trainings, specifically custom trainings at, say, building departments, etc. So be in touch with any information that or the topics that you may be interested in. And you will be getting an email with the recorded recording from today. Feel free to pass it on. Feel free to let other people know about this. And then again, the Code Coach program is something that's available to you for any questions related to energy code. It's a pretty easy process. And obviously we have a great team who can really dig down and answer your questions. So unless anyone has anything else, we will wrap it up. Great. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Glad you made it.
Bye-bye.